2003, I had an opportunity to come to work with this ministry, and it's just been an incredible ride for me since then. We work with churches all over the United States, and we train all over the world. I've had the privilege of being in China and Vietnam and Africa, and it's just God is doing something in the world, y'all. The sports ministry movement is a really relatively new movement. It's not something that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. Among local churches, it's really about a 20 to 30-year movement, both in the United States and around the world. I mean, you're on the leading edge of a movement that God is doing. The Lausanne Congress of Evangelism would say that sports ministry is the #1 evangelistic movement in the world today. So you are a part of something significant that God's doing. And He's inviting you into the story, and it's a grand story. Now, as a coach, you sit here this morning, you got lots of questions. You might be asking, well, who's on my team? You might be asking, when do I practice? You might be asking, where do I practice? When's the first game? You might be asking, who else is in our league? Lots and lots of questions. And these are important questions, and hopefully before your first practice, the staff will make very clear all the answers to those questions. But what I find with coaches that I work with is that their preoccupation with those questions can cloud them from what I call the ultimate question, the most important question. Now, I'm not going to ask you to give me a show of hands or anything, but if I were to ask you to write down, what do you think is the most important question you ought to be asking this morning? I wonder what you put. You see, the most important question is not who, it's not when, it's not where, it's not how, it's not what. The most important question, the ultimate question, is always why. Why? Why are you coaching? Rick Warren says, the most important question is always why. Now, you might even be thinking this morning, wait a minute, Bob, wait a minute. This is a Christian league. We all know why we're here. Let's get to the important stuff. Is it really necessary to ask why, Bob? And so, in the light of what I understand would be that objection, I'm just going to give you a couple of reasons why we need to even ask why. You see, unless you check your motivation, it's going to go unchallenged, and you'll blow into the season unexamined with potentially serious consequences. So I want to ask you, I want you to think about, why is it even important to ask why? And the main reason is asking why exposes motivations. Asking why gets beneath the surface of what we do to why we do what we do. You see, and this is important because the motivations of our heart are what ultimately determine the good or bad of something. Now, I'm not talking about inherently bad behaviors. I'm talking about behaviors that are either good or neutral. Coaching, raising a family, working. Those are all, we might call them either good or neutral things. The motivations underneath those are what make them ultimately good or bad. See, Jesus taught very, very clearly that the good or bad of something is not so much in the act itself, but in the motivation underneath it. So we want to ask why. Because in doing so, your and my motivations are exposed. Do you realize, in fact, that Jesus' harshest words as He walked the earth were for people who did good things for all the wrong reasons? Who coached in a Christian league for all the wrong reasons. If he were walking today, if coaches' meetings that were filled with those kind of people would be recipients of some of Jesus' harshest words. You see, he made it clear that a good behavior done for a bad motivation made for something bad. Good behavior times a bad motivation, in fact, equals sin. Another way of saying it is that my behavior is trumped by my motivations. So why do we need to ask why? Because asking why exposes motivations which ultimately determine the good or bad of our coaching this season. So, why are you coaching? Now, I can imagine, if you were sitting here, that you might be giving answers like I often hear. Well, I want to spend time with my kids. I want to have an impact on children. I happen to like the baseball or the soccer or the volleyball that I'm going to be coaching. I want to have fun. Or maybe it's I just like to coach. And I'd ask you to consider now this morning, which of those answers or other answers would you give to the question, why are you coaching this season? Interestingly enough, in all the times that I train coaches, and I ask this question, I've never had, except once, I've only one time had a coach raise his hand and say, well, Bob, the reason I'm coaching is to win. I mean, why would anybody coach except to win? And so, if you were honest, would you even put that as one of your reasons for coaching this season? Whether you're this is the first time you've stepped on the field to coach, or whether it's the 30th season. I want you to again consider this morning, why are you coaching this season? Now, in the list of those answers, what I'd like to do is now just unpack a couple of them and examine them a little more closely. And the first one I want to look at is this one of winning. When winning is the reason to coach. You might even be hearing in your mind the voice of Vince Lombardi. Remember what he said? Winning isn't everything. Winning is the only thing. If you're sitting there and have grown up in the United States, that mindset permeates sports today. And it's influenced you, whether you realize it or not. And so I bring this up because I want you to examine, even for a moment, how much of winning is a part of the reason how much of the reason that you're coaching is winning. Now, at the same time that we bring up Vince Lombardi, there's been other coaches, respectable coaches. Chuck Noll from the Pittsburgh Steelers says it this way: a life of frustration is inevitable for any coach whose main enjoyment is winning. John Wooden, who many people consider to be one of the great, if not the greatest coach that's ever coached basketball and maybe any sport. Won 10 NCAA titles, 7 in a row. No one's, I don't think, ever going to come close to that record. Do you know what's interesting about him? He says it this way: if there's anything you could point out where I was a little different, it was the fact that I never mentioned winning. The winningest coach from the standpoint of NCAA titles just told you he never mentioned winning. Now, Chuck Noll and I think John Wooden might have said this ultimately because of the problems that are around the idea of winning. You see, first of all, winning is impossible to achieve all the time. Winning is something you as a coach, or even if you were as a player, you can't ultimately control. Winning that game that you're going to be playing will be in the control of a lot of different factors. the other players on the team, the different players on your team, the other coaches, the referees. There are many, many factors that are involved in that. And if you make it your motivation, what happens is you turn into a manipulator of all those factors and into an angry person, because you realize very quickly that those people, children, adults, are blocking your goal from being achieved. And when they block that goal, the result of that, the emotion that is the result of that, is anger. And if you want to Google something that'll depress you, just put angry coaches into YouTube. And you'll see there's a ton of coaches out there that are modeling that winning isn't everything. Winning is the only thing. And don't think you'll be only find coaches from the NCAA or from professional ranks. I could show you story after story after story of quote, quote, Christian leagues that are filled with angry coaches and parents because they've made winning the goal, the motivation. Now, a goal, by definition or by clarification in my mind, is something that I can control the outcome of. And so I think winning is a bad goal, but a good desire. A desire is something I want, but ultimately can't control the achievement of it. Now, the difference between knowing whether something is a goal or a desire is what happens when it isn't achieved. I just told you. What happens when a goal is not achieved? What's the resulting emotion? What? Anger. The resulting emotion when a desire is not achieved is disappointment. They're hugely different. Anger is the result of a goal that's not achieved. Disappointment is the result of a desire that's not achieved. So I would say winning is a bad goal, but it's a good desire. Or it can be. Let me put it that way. Listen to how Larry Bird clarifies his understanding. A winner is someone who recognizes his God-given talents, works his tail off to develop them into skills, and uses these skills to accomplish his goals. He made this definition of winning his goal. Because what? He could control all that. He could control the idea of working hard and using his talents. John Wooden even said it this way: although I wanted my players to work to win, good desire, I tried to convince them that they'd always won when they had done their best. Because what they could control was what they did on the court. That's all they could control, right? Do you see what they've done as coaches? They've said, don't make winning your goal. Something you might want, you can enjoy, but don't make it your goal. So it's a bad goal, but a good desire. But there's really a more serious problem with winning as a goal. You see, winning as a goal can easily distract us from all other goals. There's something about the human heart, which we'll talk about in a little bit, in our search for glory, that makes winning an all-encompassing goal. It like clouds everything else. People lose sight of even the simplest, most important things when winning becomes something on the horizon. If you've played any sports at any competitive level, you understand exactly what I mean. What happens when winning becomes the goal is it becomes really all about the sport and very little about the ministry that goes on. Now, what about these motivations of spending time with our kids or of ministering to kids or having fun? What could be wrong with those motivations? I can hear you saying, Bob. Bob, why would it be wrong? Why would it be bad? What would be the improper nature of making those my motivation? And again, I would say possibly something very seriously wrong. You see, those goals or those motivations of spending time with kids or of ministering to kids or of having fun or of your own enjoyment of the coaching, they're really incomplete motivations. And there's a problem when we make our good goals into ultimate ones. They're good, but they're not ultimate motivations. And there's a problem when we take something that is a good motivation and make it an ultimate motivation. Now, let me explain what I mean by that by referring to Tim Keller. Tim Keller, in his book, Counterfeits God, says this: sin isn't only doing bad things, it is more fundamentally making good things into ultimate things. Let me read that again. Listen very carefully. Sin isn't only doing bad things, it is more fundamentally making good things into ultimate things. Have you ever even thought about that distinction? You should. Because that's just what sin is. Sin is building your life and meaning on anything, even a very good thing, than on God. Whatever we build our life on will drive us and enslave us. Sin is primarily idolatry. Most people know you can make a god out of money. Most know you can make a god out of sex. However, anything in life can serve as an idol, a god alternative, a counterfeit god. Even spending time with your kids, even wanting to minister to kids, even wanting to have fun on the field, even enjoyment of the game. Those can become just as idolatrous as the things that you think might be readily given to idolatry. Do you see what he's saying? Anything can become a form of idolatry when you take any good thing and turn it into an ultimate thing. Now, by the word idolatry, again, that's somewhat of a strange word in our culture. We tend to think of maybe Middle Eastern cultures with little statues in their houses, and that's what we think of idols. That's not what an idol is. An idol is anything that we look to other than God for what God alone has promised and can give us. It's when we take good things like our jobs and our families and our possessions that God has given those to us and make them what life is about. Instead of being gifts from God, we make them God's substitutes. And coaching can fit right into this. So go back. Think about this for a moment. Spending time with your kids, having fun, ministering to people, these good things can become ultimate things. And when they become ultimate things, they become sin. Because you've committed idolatry. Now, men and women, this is a huge problem in sports. Sports are littered with people who've made a good thing of competition and games into an ultimate thing. And the question you ought to be asking yourself now is, then how do I keep the good things in the right place? I don't want to just get rid of them, because if I said to you to get rid of them, then you all would have to do what? Quit coaching, right? And we'd all just dismiss, and we wouldn't have any coaches for the season. So that's not the point. We want to keep the good things that you have in your mind for coaching and keep them in the right place. Shift them down from the ultimate place. Keep them in the right place. How do we do that? The only way that I know to do that is to make the ultimate thing the ultimate thing. And the thing you ought to be asking is, so then what's the ultimate thing? And the answer to that question is, why would God want you to coach? The answer is in the question, why does God want you to coach? And I'd ask you to turn in your minds or in your Bibles, if you have them, to a passage that maybe you know, maybe you've thought of, maybe you've even looked at, but we're going to look at it a little more closely this morning. And what we want to do is see if we can find the ultimate thing that will keep the good things in the right place and will drive out the idolatry that we so need to have driven out of our hearts. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Now I want you to notice, Paul, writing to the Corinthians, one of the churches that he had as close a relationship as the churches that he planted in the first century, spent extensive time there, wrote him at least 3 or 4 letters, 2 which we have in the New Testament. Deeply invested in this group of people, and they had a problem with idolatry. And in the midst of this discussion of food sacrificed to idols and the problem of idolatry in that culture, he brings us up. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory. Do it all for the glory. Whether you coach, whether you practice, whether you put your lineup together, do it all for the glory. He unapologetically says to us today, whatever we do it for the glory. He doesn't say, get rid of your desire to do it for the glory. He just says, put your desire for the right kind of glory. Do it for the glory of God, not you. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do as a coach, do it for the glory of God. Now, as I've traveled around or as I've talked to people, this concept of glory is something we use a lot in the Christian realm. We talk about it, we sing about it, but I ask people, is there a compelling definition that makes of glory that makes for you the glory of God the ultimate thing that would drive out every other aspect of your heart for why you're coaching? And I've yet to find anybody that can give me that. Because it's one of these words that we use a lot, but we've never really thought much about. Glory means 2 things. If you looked it up in the dictionary, you'd find 2 definitions. You'd find this idea of brilliance, this idea of radiance, but you'd also find this idea of honor and fame. And when you go to the glory of God, you have the same 2 ideas. The glory of God is encompassed in 2 ideas. We see this flame. We see this brilliance. We see this magnificence. John Piper calls it the beauty of God's manifold perfections. Now, for most of you all, if you're like me, you'd have to get a dictionary out to even know what that meant. The beauty, the radiance of God's manifold, which is many or various perfections. The magnificence of God is so multifaceted and so significant that it has an actual shining out. That's called in the Old Testament the Shekinah what? Glory. The Shekinah glory of God. And if you looked in Exodus, for instance, when God was leading the nation of Israel away from Egypt, there were 2 things. There was a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire. And the Scriptures talk about the glory of God going before the nation of Israel. And when Moses came down from appearing before the glory of God, you know what his face did? His face shined, or it gave off light because he was in the presence of the glory of God. We see this also with Jesus. On the Mount of Transfiguration, you know, there's a Christmas hymn that I think is dead wrong. It goes, mild he lays his glory by. I don't think Jesus laid his glory by at all. And I see that very clearly in the Transfiguration. He goes up on this mountain, takes James, John, and Peter, and then listen to what it says in verse 29 and verse 28 of Luke 9. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, James, and John with him and went up to a mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as the flash of lightning. Jesus didn't lay aside his glory. He just veiled it. And on the Mount of Transfiguration, he just went like this. And when he went like that, light came out like it was the flash of lightning. That's how Luke described it. This is the glory of God that in Isaiah 6:3, when the 4 living creatures are before him, say, holy, 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 holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is full of His what? His glory. It's a statement of fact. This glory of God is radiating all around the world. Now, when you and I coach, we don't enhance, when it says, whatever you do, do it for the glory of God. It's not as if we can enhance or do anything for this aspect of His glory. The flame of God's glory is perfectly secure. The brilliance of His magnificence cannot be touched or altered or corrupted in any way. Isn't that magnificent to think about? We can't harm or hurt that in any way. That's not the part of God's glory that Paul's talking about here, though. You see, there's this other aspect that the psalmist said, "Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth." That's a request. In Isaiah, it was a statement. What was it? The whole earth is full of your glory, your Shekinah radiance. The heavens declare the glory of God, the Shekinah radiance. But then the psalmist says, let your glory be over the earth. What does he mean? He means the second aspect, the fame of God, the honor, the recognition of this magnificence. And the whole earth is not full of that recognition, is it? That glory. All we'd have to do is go down to your local mall and say, tell me about who God is. And some would say, well, man, He's like a grandfather in the sky. Some might even say, well, He's a nice man. He forgives for my sins. Some might even say, well, she's really gracious. Others might say there's no such thing. See, the whole world does not currently acknowledge God for who He is. And this is the part of the glory of God that we coach for. We enhance His fame. We make known who He is. We give Him glory by the way we coach. Now notice what Paul says. Whatever you do, do it for this enhancement of the fame of God. If you have a note or a Bible, you'd underline the word whatever. How much of your coaching can bring greater fame to God? How much of it? All of it. Every bit of all that you do, whatever you do as a coach. There is nothing insignificant. There is no sacred, secular distinction in our minds. It's not like, okay, when you do the devotions, now that's what's really important. And all the practice and the game stuff, that doesn't really matter. It's not what Paul said. Paul says, man, the devotions are important, but so is the way you practice, so is the way you substitute, so is the way you encourage, because whatever you do can be for that glory. Wow. Then he doesn't stay there. Whatever you do, do every bit of all you do. Is to do it all. Whatever is there. All of it, 100%. Every square centimeter and every second is claimed by God as mine, the historical leader said. And it's for us to live that way. Now, men and women, when there have been people that have gotten a hold of this, it's changed them. When cultures got a hold of this, it revolutionized them. We sit here today because of what's known as the Reformation. In the 1500s, Martin Luther began what was known as the Reformation. And we're in a Protestant church this morning because of that movement. Do you know one of the marks of that movement was that all that you do can be done for the glory of God? There isn't a secular, sacred distinction. There isn't Christian stuff that you do on Sunday, and that's what really matters to God. But what you do Monday through Saturday, that doesn't matter. Your work, your marriage, your kids, your school, your recreation, that doesn't matter. This stuff is the real important, the sacred stuff. This stuff's the secular. And Martin Luther came in and said, all of life should be lived for the glory of God. And you know what happened? It revolutionized stonemasons, musicians, architects, writers, painters, sculptors. And you know what happened? Some of the greatest literature, some of the greatest art, some of the greatest architecture, some of the greatest music that the world has ever seen came forth when people realized that whatever they did could be done for the glory of God. Nothing was insignificant. Nothing. Our dream at CSO is that coaches would capture this idea that every bit of all that they do can be significant and enhance the fame of God in the world. And it would revolutionize sports and bring forth the greatest coaching the world has ever seen. Now, if you're with us, if you're thinking, yeah, I'd like to be a part of something like that, you might be asking, well, what the heck do I do? What does it mean to actually do that? What does it mean to actually enhance the fame of God? Simple. You spread the fame of God when you display His character in your coaching. When you are like God in your coaching, not act, when you are like Him. When you display this character from your being, this enhances the fame of God in the world. Now you might then be saying, well, Bob, how much of God's character? I mean, God's character has all kinds of different aspects, right? Think about it. What are some of the attributes? Love and joy and holiness and righteousness and strength and power and justice. What all am I supposed to display? I'd say all of it. It's a tall order to take all of God, pour it into you, and put it into every bit of all you do as coaching. And it should humble you. It should be like, how in the world am I going to do that this season? And now you're in a good place. Because you're on your face before God saying, could it be that you would actually want to use me? Would you make me this season a visible display of your character? I can't do it on my own, God. There's no way. But I hear you say there, Bob, coach every bit of all you do, coach for my glory. Okay, I'm going to do that, but I need you. It's a great challenge, but it's a great opportunity. Your children, your parents, your culture need this, because the fame of God is not all that it needs to be. God is not being glorified to the degree that He should be glorified for His magnificence. And that calls forth from us the need to glorify Him so that others would become a part of that. Now, while there's a lot of aspects, I've just got one concluding idea. Typically, when we think of Christian coaching, we think of, let's inject the sacred into the secular. Okay? So now we're going to do our devotions. And so what we've done for the last 55 minutes didn't have anything to do with God. I talked about that a moment ago. Now this is what's really going to have to matter. And I'm saying, no. Get rid of that mindset. The first way that I'm asking you today to manifest the character of God, to display it, is to have an integrated, not an injected view of sports and ministry. And an integrated view of sports and ministry sees all of this as spiritual. There is no distinction. There isn't any part that is spiritual and isn't spiritual. This is the way God looks at the world. The earth is mine and everything in it. Everything is everything. Everything. All that you do, all your kids, those are all, everything is everything. So think this way. To battle the temptation to think, this doesn't matter tonight. Now, so when you walk onto the field, when you step out of your car to go to practice, when you call someone, you remember, whatever I do, I'm going to do this for the glory of God. I want to do this with trying to display the character of God. And when I do that, I'm enhancing His fame in the world. I want to spread it. I want to enhance it. I want people to see it. And so now, Now what I want you to think about for just a moment is how your season would be different if you did that throughout every bit of all that you do. And then I want you to think about how would this whole community be different if every one of you did that this season? How many kids' lives would be influenced? How many parents would go, that place is different? Those people are different. So why do you coach? Why do you coach? To spread the fame of God's greatness. How do you do that? By displaying his character in every bit of all that you coach. This is the call that God is making today to the coaches of our culture. Whatever you do, do it all for my glory, he says. Do you hear his call today? Let's pray. Father, thank you for this time that we could discuss this most important, ultimate question. Thank you for redeeming and making meaningful every bit of all that we do. Would you guide and direct? Would you lead these folks this season? To this end, I ask in your name, Jesus. Amen.